Hello and welcome to episode 139 of Tom's Hardware, the podcast for July 25, 2023. Wow, end of July already. I'm your host, Associate Editor Les Pounder, and I would normally say with me as always is Ash and Avram, but they're having some time off, so it's just me and our guest tonight. But luckily, I know the guest rather well, but I'm going to let him introduce himself. So, Josh, tell the world who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Les, for having me. So my name is Josh. I am the creator of Edublocks. Doing it for coming up on 7 years now. So my work is all centered around helping kids get into coding, specifically with Python, and making learning text-based languages a lot easier than it otherwise would be.
Awesome. So you say you've been doing this for 7 years, but what you're not really told people is how old you are. How old are you, Josh?
So I'm 19. So I've actually been doing coding a lot longer than Edublocks. So I started when I was about 8 years old through the local Raspberry Jam event. So Raspberry Jams, which aren't so much a thing as they were back then now, but essentially what Raspberry Jam is, for those who don't know, is a meetup of Raspberry Pi enthusiasts. And I went along when I was just 8 years old. Sort of had a passing interest in technology of taking things apart, and I'd heard of this Raspberry Pi thing, but never really played around with one. And went to this event to learn from other people, kind of pick up knowledge, and that's kind of where my interest really grew from. Really, just like being surrounded by people who are interested in the same thing as me, and picking things up, which led me on to what I do now.
That's awesome. It's one thing going to a Raspberry Jam, but then creating your own programming environment to help kids to learn programming is a big step. So, how did you start Edublocks? What was the first step on the road for it?
So essentially, I learned Scratch from the beginning. That's how I got into coding. So I'd done Scratch. I played around with the block-based environment, and then kind of like the point where I realized that this is definitely something I want to go into as a job someday. It was quite early at that point, but I knew that this sort of field is what I'd want to go into.
Yeah.
And from that kind of realization of that I wanted to do it as a full-time job at some point, I realized that, right, I'm going to have to learn text-based programming. I can't get a job as a Scratch developer. And so Python was the obvious choice. And, it was what was the most, widely used on the Raspberry Pi, which was what I was heavily involved in at the time within that community. And yeah, I picked up Python. And it wasn't easy, even as someone who kind of, done a lot of Scratch programming. And it sort of coincided with me learning programming at school. Well, kind of covering it in school. And I sort of from that just picked up that other kids were struggling as well. And there's this huge problem of you go from Scratch, which is this fun visual environment of you can get the cat to do different things. You can add background. It's all colorful and very easy to use, which is, good for its target audience. And then you put into essentially a blank canvas of a text prompt, and you don't really know what to do with it. And I kind of realized that, like, for most people, there needs to be something in the middle that is sort of keeping that Scratch environment, but it's more focused around teaching the concepts of text-based programming. And that's where Edublocks came from, because at the time, I'd learned the skills that I needed to be able to build it.
Awesome. So you've got Edublocks. You've written this IDE. It's everywhere. People are using it. But how many people, or how many countries, or how many groups have used Edublocks over the years, do you reckon?
So it's definitely in the millions.
Wow.
Kind of just like a top level figure. And Edublocks actually started. So the first kind of like iteration of Edublocks was actually written at an event that you ran, Les, Blackpool Raspberry Jam, and that's where it started. And And like I'd had the idea before then, but that's kind of where I, initially started the project. And it was a Saturday afternoon in Blackpool. And the first thing that I did with it flashed a red LED on the Raspberry Pi. So it originally started
Good choice.
as a piece of software for the Raspberry Pi, and it just did very basic things. And I thought that, I'll create this thing, I'll put it on GitHub, people can download it, and I'll never touch it again.
Yeah.
But now I'm here 7 years later, still working on it. So I definitely didn't expect it to have the users that it's had and the reach that it's had. But I'm definitely glad that it's found its audience and it's found users that find it useful.
It definitely has, yeah. I mean, you've gone from a small one-person operation creating software, open source software, and recently your software has been acquired by Anaconda. So can you tell us a little bit about Anaconda and also why they were interested in Edublocks?
Sure. So Anaconda are a massive company, especially in the Python data science world. So kind of like the most well-known thing is Anaconda distribution, which is a distribution of Python which makes working with data science and packaging a lot easier.
Yeah.
But kind of core to Anaconda's mission is making Python accessible to as many people as possible. And very kind of last year, Anaconda Learning started up, which is the team that I work on now.
Yeah.
All around kind of introducing people to Python and the various ways that you can use it. And Anaconda were interested in kind of bringing the barrier to entry into Python down even further, to kind of like in America they call it K through 12, which is sort of like primary and secondary education for here in the UK. And they saw Edublocks as the perfect way to do that. So at the time, it's always Edublocks was always a spare time project that I would work on in the evenings and weekends. But now, since Anaconda have acquired it, I'm lucky to be able to do it as a full-time job, which, just going back to the origins of Edublocks, I never thought I'd say to be able to do it as a full-time job. But I also get to work with a team of, people who are passionate about Python, passionate about education, and it's a real team effort now, and not just me. And the benefits are really, really showing there.
No, that's great. I mean, with the support of Anaconda, what's Edublocks going to be doing in the future? How are you going to progress and improve Edublocks for more users?
So, so there's an open source project, and this is my focus at the minute of where we kind of want to take Edublocks. There's an open source project that some of my colleagues at Anaconda work on, called PyScript, and PyScript is essentially making Python in the browser easier. So before, if you go back, let's say 5 or 6 years, if you wanted to use some form of Python in the browser, and like Edublocks now, you would use something called like Sculpt is what it's called, or something like that, which is essentially Python, and then it like gets translated into JavaScript to be able to run in the browser.
Yeah.
But what PyScript does is it relies on something called PyDide, and other interpreters are coming in the next version, like MicroPython, which is essentially a version of Python. I'm getting quite technical here. It's a version of Python that is compiled to something called WebAssembly, and the basic version of that is it's a virtual machine running inside the browser. So you get full support for Python, which is really cool. And PyScript is like a layer on top of that, which makes it super easy. And you just write your Python code in a script tag, just like you would JavaScript. And the good thing about bringing that to Edublocks is that, we can unlock so much capability with Python. So it's real Python, not just JavaScript, which it is currently. And so like basically all the Python libraries that people get really excited about and are really cool, we'll be able to add it to Edublocks, and kids will be able to learn even more Python than they could before. So that's kind of like how I think about extending it and what the plan is.
That's brilliant. But it's an interesting segue then. We could say, how easy is Edublocks to use? Are you able to demonstrate something quickly now so everyone can see how it works?
Sure. So yeah, last week we released a new version of Edublocks, which is essentially, it's been years in the works, but especially in these past few months since joining Anaconda, it's really developed on to a point where we've released it. So if I share my screen, choose the right one. Okay, so this is the Edublocks dashboard here. So we essentially get some options to create projects. So these are different modes here. So if I click on the Python 3 mode, we then get launched into a blocks editor. So this is very much like Scratch, where you've got all your blocks on the left here, but you can actually see that this is Python code, right? So one block equals one line of code. So you see that the print statement matches up with the code on the right. So if I run this, it's then going to print hello world in the console here. So that's how easy it is. It's as simple as dragging and dropping some blocks into the workspace here, and then that generates your Python code on the right. But you can also do interesting things with it. So these are some example projects. So if I load this one, so this is a library called Turtle, which is a library for creating artwork and drawing within Python. So this creates essentially a spiral kind of artwork project here. So you can do fun things like that, which makes Python more engaging than just hello world. So like learning those fundamental concepts are really important, but then Edublocks is all about adding in the fun side to Python as well, and teaching Python through fun and engaging methods like Turtle as an example. And PyScript is going to unlock even more things. So for example, one of the extensions that I'm working on, and extensions are a way of integrating third-party things into Edublocks, so third-party libraries. One of the things I've worked on, which is based off a really cool fork of Scratch made by Machine Learning for Kids. So Dale, who works at IBM, he's built this project, and he made a Scratch extension which integrates with Spotify to be able to play Spotify songs within Python. And he has kindly let me implement a very similar thing as an Edublocks extension, and PyScript is going to let us run really cool things like that, like being able to play Spotify songs through Python in the browser. So these are like everything that I'm trying to work on is trying to make Python fun and engaging to learn. And coming back onto the PyScript thing, I'll be able to do even more than I currently do. And there's lots already in here, but that's just an example of things that will come in the future.
That's very cool. Let's just get back to the original layout. There we go. I noticed when you were going through the setup then, obviously Python 3 supported, HTML to write your own web page for there, but you've also got content for Microbit, CircuitPython, and Raspberry Pi. How does that differ to Python 3?
Okay, so if I go back to my screen share here, let's use the micro mode as an example. So this is the microbit mode. So you can see that we've got a very similar layout. So you still have all of your blocks that you would use with Python, but you've also got the addition of hardware specific kind of blocks in here. So a new feature that has just been added into the Edublocks release that we did last week is a simulator for the microbit. So this is
That's
based off
cool.
the work of the Microbit Foundation.
Mhm.
So what it's going to allow me to do is import some microbit blocks, press play, and I can run my microbit code in the browser, and also kind of play around with the sensor values, simulate button presses, and also log some data if I wanted to play around with that. So essentially, all the modes that isn't HTML is built on top of that Python 3 mode, but add in hardware specific features, like you can see on the left here. So like NeoPixels, music, radio, accelerometers, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I also noticed you got the microphone on there, which is a Microbit version 2 feature. So that's quite interesting to see.
Yeah, so the version 2, which the simulator is based off, has some really cool functionality with extra sensors and things like that. So yeah, all of that is supported in here as well.
Nice. So also this is MicroPython for the microbits. What about general MicroPython support? When can we expect to see something along those lines? Because I'll admit, ESP32s, ESP8266s, and boards such as that, that's what I really enjoy hacking around with MicroPython.
Yeah, so obviously we have the CircuitPython sort of mode right now, which is very much CircuitPython is a fork of MicroPython, and it's like very much education focused, which is why that was sort of the priority to add. But I have seen some interest in adding like a MicroPython specific mode, especially with the Raspberry Pi Pico, which currently doesn't have a lot of adoption in schools, but I think over the next few years is going to increase quite rapidly. So I definitely am looking into that as kind of like just seeing what the popularity is in schools. Obviously, schools are the main focus of Edublocks, so the two kind of have to tie in together.
Yeah.
But there is a feedback section within the Edublocks app. Here, there's a feedback tab, and there is an open card for that. So people who are interested can kind of submit ideas onto here. And this is essentially what we look at when we want to build product roadmap. So there is a MicroPython card on here. So if it's something people are interested in, they can upvote it.
Very cool. Nice way of doing it as well. So I'll admit my question before about MicroPython is a bit self-centered, I'll say, because I've been playing around with CircuitPython on Edublocks today. So let me just go to solo, so you just see me, and I'll just switch over to the right section. There we go. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen is Edublocks, and this is CircuitPython I'm running now, and this is running on a Pico, and it's running on a Pico with the Cytron Robo Pico board here, so breakout board. So you can see there's two NeoPixels just there, and it's pretty easy to do. You'll see the blocks on the left and the code on the right. I'm just importing libraries, so board, digital I/O, time, random, NeoPixel, telling the code where to look for the NeoPixels. So there's a NeoPixel connected to GP18, and there's two of them. And then just a loop that says set the value for RGB to be a random value between 1 and 254. Then set those NeoPixels, 0 and 1, so there's two NeoPixels, to those values. Show it, wait for a second, and just goes around in a loop all the time. That's all in blocks, and it's all hardware running on a Raspberry Pi Pico W on the Robo Pico. So it's possible. I would have liked to have seen a way where I can get the code directly on the Pico, because for this to get it on the code, I had to download the code as code.py, then manually copy it across. Now I noticed on the microbit section, you've got a connection tab, a USB connection tab. So do you think it would be possible in the future to have the code just flash directly onto a CircuitPython device, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a new browser API called the File System Access API. So if you look at the official CircuitPython web editor, I believe that uses it. And it's essentially a way of the browser being able to access folders and drives directly. So essentially, I have done a prototype of it, but not really finished it yet, where the CircuitPython mode can access the CircuitPython drive and write and read files directly from that. So yeah, it's definitely a possibility to make that a lot easier.
That is awesome. Do you get any support from Adafruit these days for CircuitPython in Micro?
Yes, so
Edublocks?
so they regularly feature Edublocks stuff on their Python hardware newsletter, and yeah, they've always been good at supporting the CircuitPython mode. And the exciting thing is that the new Edublocks release has support for extensions on all of the Python modes. So you can now actually write extensions to support third-party CircuitPython libraries if you wanted to do so.
That is very cool. Very cool indeed. So, last question for you, Josh. I'm going to wrap it up. If you could do anything with Edublocks now, any new feature at all, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's difficult. Well, so I've actually sort of already mentioned it. So I think once Python is kind of integrated, I can see a lot of possibilities with that. And that's going to open the way for a lot more extensions. Extensions is something I'm quite excited about, because that's going to allow anyone to add blocks to Edublocks. And essentially the way that you do that is you create some definitions for the blocks that you want to add. And then you push that up to a GitHub repository and directly import it within Edublocks. So you just open the extensions tab, type in the GitHub URL, and it adds the blocks. So I think there's a lot of kind of, even though it's an already existing feature, I'm excited to see what people will build with that, and have kind of like a community of extensions being built. So really what I'm excited for, I guess, is what other people are going to add to the platform through that feature.
That's a good response. And also you have a legacy then, because it's not just going to be code that's released into the wild and it lives for so long and then it dies. It'll evolve and carry on and become something bigger than what it already is.
Yeah. And kind of like one thing that I would add, just to kind of add to my point, I think it would be quite cool on the HTML mode to be able to like publish a website. So adding more like sharing capabilities, so the ability to like create a website and then push it up to a domain name and like people can create that. So yeah, I would probably like to add that at some point. I think that'd be quite cool.
That would be very cool indeed. I remember doing that with HTML back in the late 90s, which is a long, long time ago, learning HTML. Yes, that was fun. All right, well, with no fancy graphics or sound yet, so I need to go on to the next section, which is our segments for news and reviews. I really should do some fancy graphics for this, but I haven't yet. So I've got a few projects I want to talk about, and the first one I've got on the screen now is Lego Pacman. Now you're probably thinking, why? Why are we talking about Lego Pacman? It's Lego. This is a technology show about Raspberry Pis. Well, this Lego Pacman cabinet is made out of Lego, and it should be animated using Lego, a little crank handle on the side. But it doesn't have that. So the guy who's done this is Matt Brailsford, and he's put a Raspberry Pi 02W inside and a 10-inch screen and real arcade controls. So it is a real arcade cabinet running Pacman via MAME, and it plays perfectly. It's an astounding piece of work. It all fits properly. There's no gaps anywhere. Built completely from Lego, and even custom Lego bricks have been 3D printed inside it, just so you can get the tolerances just right for putting the buttons in. It's a beautiful piece of work. And every credit to Matt for making this. It's brilliant. So if you don't know, 3D printing Lego is exceptionally difficult because Lego has very tight tolerances. You get them wrong, they don't fit together. So getting it to fit together and become just look like it should be there is perfect. So I made a joke with Matt saying that when they make a Star Wars cabinet in this size, let me know because I'll have one. And I mean that. I'd like one in that size. That'd be great. So I'm going to put a link to this in the chat so you can have a look at it for yourselves. Normally it's completely seamless because one of us is talking and another one of us is copy pasting. No, that's not gone right. I'll put it in the comments after. Don't worry. We can all see it. Next thing is, he says, there we go. This thing which Ash spotted earlier on today. So another arcade thing now, but this is more to do with an animation. So this is an animated retro art frame. It looks like neon, but really it's just neopixels. I say it's neopixels, WS2812B LEDs around the frame. But there's 4 to 6 layers of laser cut acrylic and laser etched acrylic, which when you light up in a certain sequence, it looks like it's animated. And that's what this maker has done. Sprixels has created it. And it's, again, just like Matt's piece of work, this is astounding. It looks beautiful. The colors are vibrant and rich. It looks like neon. It's not, it's LED, but it looks like neon. It's beautiful. And you can pick these up and stick them in your room, and you can chain about 7 together to make a lovely display. And I'm tempted. I really am tempted to get one of these. So that'll be in the comments as well. Down below the description thing. You should think, I'm doing it all this time, I should know what YouTube's all about. But finally, it's a review that I did last week. So Cytron Robo Pico review. It's actually the thing that was doing the light show before. I've given it 5 stars. Editor's choice, simply because it's great. It's perfect. You've got all the connections for Grove connections on the base. If I go to the overhead camera so you can see where I'm pointing, that's always a good shot. So you can see, if I just make this ever so slightly bigger, there you go. You've got Grove connections at the base and at the side. Those allow you to plug in Grove components, which are usually just a little bit dearer than normal components, but they just work. You plug them in, you can get sensors, motors, that sort of thing. We've got STEMMA QT connections just there. They're called maker ports on here. Motor connections, we're plugging in DC motors, 6-volt motors, and you've got buttons to test the motors as well. Servo connections, neopixels, because you have to have neopixels, that is a law. And it works with the Pico and Pico W. So it's about $15 at the minute, but it was on sale for $10 to $12 recently, this little board. But absolutely perfect. Oh, and it has LiPo charging. You can plug in a LiPo battery just there, power the Pico and the whole board through the micro USB slot there. It charges up the battery, remove the power, it just keeps running. So you can build robots with this. You can build whatever you want. You can make music with it. It's got a speaker as well. It's just great fun. So 5 stars, editor's choice. It just had to be done. Lovely piece of kit. And that's really what the review's all about, where I just talk about what I did with this. So I made a quick project with it. Let's just go down. So there's a comparison to an older board, which I've got here as well. And there's a quick project I made. So we've got the Robo Pico MPR121 touch sensor, a relay connected via Grove. So MPR121 is connected via STEMMA. Grove connects the relay. Then I've got a LiPo battery as well. It's all self-contained. It just runs, put the code on, flash it on, done, away. Self-contained piece of code. But yeah, 5 stars. Awesome. If you can get one of these, grab one. You'll have a bit of fun. For teaching kids to learn coding, it's brilliant because it's got all the bits and pieces built into the board. You haven't got to worry about wiring or soldering. We can just show LEDs. We can make neopixels flash, make music. We can connect up some motors. We can get STEMMA QT components, which are pretty cheap these days. Grove components, again, cheap and plentiful. You can pick usually boxes of Grove and STEMMA QT components on Amazon, pretty cheap. But yeah, great fun. I love it. And it's what I used for Josh's Edublocks demo tonight as well, because I thought, Well, we've got kids learning to code with Edublocks, and we've got a board that's fantastic for kids to learn coding with. So why not?
It looks great.
Yeah, good fun. Thank you. And that is 30 minutes exactly. It's not often we do this. I think it's the first time. But I want to say thank you to Josh for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And the best of luck with Edublocks. And I'll put a link on the screen now so you can see where to go for Edublocks, edublocks.org. So have a go. It's free. Play around, see what you think. If you're an educator, play around with it as well. It's got a curriculum that you can follow to learn more about it and also help the kids to learn something about it as well. They can do some pretty cool projects. But that is it for this week. We're going to be back next week with another show. We may even have a full team next week. You never know. But join us next week, 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. British summertime. See you next week. Ta-da.
Thanks, everyone.